Welcome to the latest episode of Infras. Today on the podcast, we have our guest Jim Gemus from the group space, which is the first we've ever done in the group space. So Jim, really great to have you here. Please let the audience know a little bit about your amazing background and experience in the space.
Well, great to be with you, Nelson. My background from a corporate side was a career at both MetLife and Prudential with senior roles, really across multiple lines of insurance. But my deepest background is in the group insurance space. What I'm continuing to do, now is I'm taking the learnings that I had from running distribution, running product, running virtually all of the P&Ls in the group space, and applying it to helping insurtechs and fintech companies actually improve the industry and create better capabilities that will help the end customers as well as the employers and the insurance companies that are in this ecosystem.
And tell us a little bit about the lines of business where you had direct involvement in.
So the lines were really across all of the non-medical health areas, whether it was life insurance, disability, dental, voluntary benefits, and a large part of my career was also in the medical space.
So pretty wide coverage
Yes.
across your time at both Met and Prudential.
Right.
And let's get started by maybe talking about some industry trends at a high level. What are some trends that you're seeing that will change the industry in the next, say, maybe just a 5 to 10 year range that's very different from the past 5 to 10?
Well, Nelson, the transformation in this industry has really been going on for quite some time. But the trends are actually accelerating. And I think the solutions are also accelerating. So it's an exciting time for the group insurance space. Remembering, the importance of group insurance, what does it do? Well, first off, it provides really important benefits to the end customers. It helps them in times of great need. But now, with one of the growing trends, it's also helping them to be well and to stay well, which is actually helping to avoid claims and avoiding expenses in areas where they would not like to have these expenses. The other trend that I think is really important with group insurance is that it really helps employers create an engaged workforce. When they have benefits that the employees understand and they use, study upon study will show that there's a correlation between employees who are happy with their group insurance benefits and then also happy with their employer, which leads to a more engaged workforce and a more productive workforce.
Right.
So,
they can focus their mind on the right things.
Right.
Not whether
right.
I have benefits or if they will work for me.
So moving into the trends, which was your question, the first trend is that, you actually have 5 generations of employees that are actually working in the, for these employers. 5 generations.
At the same time.
At the same time. So what you have is you really have a one-size-fits-all approach. Does not work. So it's so important to...
And the approach of that one-size-fits-all, is that an approach from the carrier level, the Ben admin level, the broker level, or is it a combination of all of them?
It's really a combination of all of them because, as you're pointing out, the group insurance ecosystem is really with all of those players, from the end employer and their employees, the customer, to the brokers and consultants that are in this space that work with those employers, to a host of intermediaries, which whether it's HRIS systems like Workday, ADP, and so forth, as well as different broker portals, and also then the group insurance. So they're all part of this.
So you mentioned an interesting topic where there's new solutions to these trends. Do you think that industry is coming up with new solutions for new problems, or are we really having the same old problems and new solutions to solve that same problem but better?
I think that there are a theme of the recurring problems and the same problems, but I think there are newer issues in the sense that employee expectations are continuing to change. They're experiencing service. When they compare their service to the service that they get in their benefit plans, they're not necessarily comparing it from one benefit plan to another benefit plan. They're comparing the service experience to the last service experience they had. And it may be from Amazon.
Has nothing to do with insurance.
Nothing to do with insurance. It may be Amazon. It might be Apple. So that's how they're comparing their experience. So the ability to create a digital experience that is similar to what they're experiencing is what employees are expecting. They're also expecting that it's personalized. It reflects where they are. It reflects their financial situation,
Which is
their
pretty different
personal
across 5 generations.
Absolutely. So while that's been a trend, it's really accelerating.
So I have 2 follow-up questions. That's fascinating. Expectations are quickly changing. Give us an example of something you feel like the customer, and I think we can have a wide definition of customer. Maybe let's include stakeholders such as Ben admins and brokers as well as employers and and consumers. What's an example of something they would collectively find acceptable 10, 15 years ago, but they would probably not find acceptable today?
10, 15 years ago, there might have been more of an expectation that solutions would be found in multiple places. So you as a user might have to go to different portals, for example, in order to get different information. So whether that's information
of the same plan?
Of the same plan.
Same company.
Whether that's information on eligibility or billing or enrollment, as examples,
So if
or
I
evidence
was-
of insurability, there was kind of an expectation that while they would like to have it in one place, that it really wasn't possible to do that. So it was a fragmented experience.
So if I understood that correctly, if I'm an end consumer, I enroll in plan A from a specific carrier, but within that same plan from that carrier, I go to say 5 different places for the 5 things you talked about. The EOI, the billing, the claims, plan information, claims, and things like that. Would that be
That would be the expectation, but
15 years ago, that was common?
Yeah, I think like an employer would provide a portal,
Right.
and you could get all of the benefits, for enrollment, say, in most situations, not all situations. But a lot of what you had to do with regard to, say, if you had to do evidence of insurability, which is when you say you want to buy more life insurance, and you may require, based on the plan rules, to prove that you're insurable in that. You may have to take a manual process in order to get that. You may have to submit a form to a insurance company in that process. What they would expect today is that it's all done as part of the enrollment process.
I totally resonate as a tech-forward end consumer that, ideally for anything, not really just insurance, but I find more things in as few places and as few clicks as possible. But here comes the difficult part that you also mentioned. It's not one size fits all. So every employer or every Ben admin benefits platform, HRIS, or every broker platform, they will differ in how they want to aggregate these things in an experience. So when you were on the carrier side as a business exec, you had to cater to so many, I would imagine probably dozens of different experiences that
Absolutely.
may not look alike to each other, and they may not have any incentive to look alike. How do you deal with that fragmentation of experiences that may further diverge as more people build yet more different experiences?
I think that creates a challenge, for the insurers, because what you have to do is you have to create that integration with all of these different organizations, whether it's, as you're saying, it's the Ben administrators, different enrollment firms. It could be HRIS providers. So that really requires an awful lot of expense and time, in order to create those connections. And if you don't have those connections, then it's hard for you to really offer that good experience to those to the employees that are using those portals.
When you were a business exec, and let's just say you had 10 different outside partners who wanted to do business with you, but none of these 10 have the same experience, so you needed to establish connectivity with all of them. 2 questions. Number one, generally, how reusable was the stuff you did, whether that was manual or technology, to connect with each of the 10? Was it just one thing and, all 10 were good to go, or did you really have to maintain 10 sets of connectivity?
You had to create 10 sets of connectivity. If you created one set of connectivity, then you had one set of connectivity. You couldn't necessarily reuse it with the next provider, because they were using different, data that they required. There are different formats in which you had to create that integration. So each of them were more or less a one-off.
That must be pretty bothersome for you as someone who owns the P&L.
Yes, well, it was bothersome in multiple levels. I mean, first it was a cost.
Right.
Second, it was time, because if you were not connected to some of these key portals, or if a particular broker that you're working with is working with a particular portal administrator or a third party, and you were not connected, then you had a hard time bidding on the business that they were bringing forward, because you were not able to really provide the experience that they were expecting. And so, you had to then, agree to do it. And,
right.
And you had to, if it was going to take time, that could actually hurt your chances of winning that business, because you had to say, instead of saying, I'm connected to this third party, you had to say, I'm willing to connect to this third party. And you had to then, go through the process of building that while you're bidding on the business, which puts you in a less competitive position.
And I assume for every major deal you want to be a part of, there's always competition, right? It's
Correct.
never. Are you
Correct.
ever in a vacuum where there is no bidding and no competition?
No, that's pretty rare.
Okay.
Carriers always hope that their existing relationships with their customers and so forth, they will renew without a bidding. But there is a lot of bidding in this marketplace, and certainly if you're going to work on a new prospect, there's going to be a bidding.
So fair to assume that there was always going to be competition, and your connectivity experience is going to be challenged if it's not up to par.
So your limits, Nelson, were based. It was time that you had against you. You had cost, as well, and then you just had sort of the limits based on your resources in order to build these connections.
The second follow-up question I have to that is, many of the group carriers and other third-party stakeholders we work with, they agree exactly what you said. Connectivity and experience is the key to have a good and less fragmented experience. But one thing a lot of people have said is we have APIs. And the we could be a carrier, or it could be a Ben admin, or it could be a variety of players or brokers. They say we have APIs, and yet it doesn't seem like the connectivity we build with each other is entirely reusable. Have you experienced that in the past, where either side had APIs and yet things felt more or less bespoke and one-off nevertheless?
Yes, I think so. So I think solutions, and why I'm very excited about the opportunity to work with Infras, is to be able to create a reusable API, a universal API, is extremely important. Because remember, all of the connectivity points that I talked about, right? Eligibility, enrollment, evidence of insurability, billing, as just some examples, as well as connecting on certain claim functions, with regard to absence, which is a very important area for employers right now, absence and leave policies, being able to connect into their HRIS system so that employees can just go to that system and then really start a claim and then have the information flow back and forth is so important. So again, if you think about having to build one-off connections versus a universal connection and an API that can be reusable, that's a major improvement for our industry.
Both for the carrier and the outside partner.
Absolutely.
Because I assume whatever is one-off from the carrier's perspective is also one-off for the outside partner, because they have to do one-offs with each different carrier. And they probably, the larger platforms probably work with multiple carriers all the time.
That's right. As well as the end consumer, right? The employer, all right, that is actually buying the service. They want to be able to provide the best experience to their employees. And by doing this and having that connectivity, you can actually do that. They're going to one place as opposed to multiple places.
So one part of that, let's call it the lack of reusability issue, I hear from a lot of industry stakeholders in group, is they say that a lot of interactions on the outside world, so outside from a carrier perspective, a lot of interactions on an outside experience produces a file, whether that's EDI or a new or different format. It produces a file. And then the file is then processed by humans. First, humans employed or contracted by the outside world, who are then received and cleansed by humans on the carrier side. Did you see a lot of that manual intervention that is somewhat labor-based when you were on the carrier side?
Yes. I think whenever you have files going back and forth, the quality assurance that you have to provide is great. So invariably, every file that you take in and every file that you send out needs to be QA'd.
And how impactful is the cost of manual intervention into files to the bottom line via P&L? Is that a small, negligible section, or is this actually like a pretty material amount of the P&L?
It's the group insurance space is a very competitive space in which there's always, you're dealing with very sophisticated buyers. Right. In the sense of employers and the brokers that they work with, and they're always driving for more value and better costs. And so the margins are, not that great in this space. And so it's really important to be able to manage your costs. And this creates a significant cost. It creates significant friction. And as you know, anytime you have manual intervention, the risk of error is much greater, and that error is also very costly.
Yeah, I was just going to say the errors probably cost both sides a lot of time and money to first find the error and then before you even fix it.
That's right, and and you have the risk of providing a bad experience to the end user. If they come in and say, you're not eligible and you're eligible, that's a problem, right? So as an example,
and these file-based processes from the end user interaction, how often are these processes identical across different platforms, employers, or brokers?
They tend to be different. You have to be able to establish your relationship, and the requirements for each of the brokers. There isn't a standard way of doing this across our industry. There's efforts underway, for that, but they're still at a very early stage.
Right. And it sounds like even if there was a standard, let's just say the industry magically agreed on one standard, just because there's a standardized file format, but if everything's still file-based, it still doesn't get rid of the manual labor-intensive process.
Absolutely.
So, I feel like what I hear a lot is people seem to insert a lot of hope about a uniform file format and solving the problem, but it doesn't sound like a file format is necessarily the end-all be-all.
It isn't. And just think about what our expectations are as consumers, right? We expect that information to be correct. When you're dealing with a service provider, you want them to know who you are, and if you've given them information before, you want that to be accurate and want it to be displayed. So the ability to have real-time exchanges of this information is also opposite of files. You'll never get that with a file, right?
So maybe trying to solve everything with any particular file format is just maybe the wrong approach to begin with. Don't get me wrong. I think a universal file format is better than no universal format, but it sounds like that's not really solving the core problem.
I think that will contribute to creating less friction points, but it certainly doesn't solve the total problem. No.
Right, because people want instant feedback and reaction and validation of what is or is not going to happen, and files inherently are not always up to date.
That's right. That's right. And especially when you think about decision support, which is really important. When you look at the technology advances and what you might be able to do. So one of the most important functions that are provided is the information and the experience around enrollment, so that individuals can get the right coverage that they need, as well as gain access to the wonderful plans that employers have, to help them in their life. And, the ability to educate individuals about the program, as well as to help them make decisions, I think can only happen when you can get real-time information about that individual, so that your decision support tool is not just general information. It's information that's specific to that individual based on their life stage, on their financial position. And the ability to do that then really helps individuals get the information they need in order to buy the coverage that they need. So everyone wins in that process. The end consumer, more people get the benefits that they need. The employer is happy with that, the broker is happy with that, and the insurer is happy with that, because they have the right level of participation in the plan, as opposed to people not participating because they really don't understand how the coverage relates to their need.
So in that world you just mentioned, where both sides win, because it's not a zero-sum game. If both sides win and enjoy a better experience and less cost, would it be then feasible for both sides to renegotiate the economics where both sides are materially better than before?
Well, I think the answer is that benefit will accrue to everyone. And as you continue to go through the pricing of the products and so forth, through renewals and so on,
rates, fees.
Yeah, I think everything can benefit, because you have because efficiency is just so important in this process.
Yeah, and if it's not a high margin line business, then pricing is going to be positively impacted, I assume.
That's right. And to that point, let's maybe double click on it for a moment, because one of those trends. All right, so we talked about the first trend in terms of the employee expectations, but the second trend, that's very strong, is the ability to incorporate technological advancements into this whole ecosystem. So, I think we have one example that we've been just talking about, but also the ability to be more efficient is so important in the process. And I think technology can also help, and this is what's different today than maybe 10 or 15 years ago, in which you can start to now see the use of AI as a way to improve the claim management process. Mm-hmm. Both from a standpoint of taking in all of this information, for example, that you might get in a disability claim, and being able to put that, on a dashboard and be able to query it using AI, really helps the approver, helps pay claims more quickly, and everyone in this process benefits. You can also use technology now to help identify fraud. where it was much harder for you to do that by going out and, as an example, and looking at all of the public information that might be on, involved in a particular claimant, and see whether or not there's a question as to whether they're eligible or not. So an example of that is, if they're saying they have musculoskeletal problems and they have a neck problem, and all of a sudden you see them skiing and being on a surfboard and so forth and moving their neck in a certain way, you may want to, ask some questions about that claim.
And if your connectivity is bespoke and one-off, even if you did build a solution, you would have to replicate it so many different times.
That's right.
Which might be cost prohibitive.
Right. Right. So I think it's I think this is an exciting time, because we can now use the more improved technology in order to improve the process and also efficiency, and then also the experience.
And when you say it's difficult to do things like file claim, get an EOR, or detect fraud, is that difficult for the carriers mostly, or is it difficult also for the outside world?
I think the end.
Who's suffering that difficulty from an experience perspective? Is it both or mostly one side?
Well, I think ultimately the experience is always the end user, and when we're not able to provide, a comprehensive experience, to that end user, then that end user suffers, because a couple of things could happen. One is, and just think about your own experiences on things. If you're trying to get a coverage and you have to provide evidence of insurability, so you have to provide some medical information and so on. If that process is difficult, what is the first thing you might do? You might say, all right, I can't do it right now, so I'm going to put it aside.
The path of least resistance is often to do nothing.
And so you put it aside, and then guess what? You may just forget to do it, or
Probably.
life goes on, right? And then someone avoids, and then something bad happens, and they don't have the coverage. So first off, you could actually have a problem in terms of people not getting the benefits they need.
So worst case scenario isn't even messing up that process. It's just skipping it all together.
Just skipping it all together, and not having the coverage. And then the second is just the fact that it requires time and cost, and that cost could come not just from the technology and the file feeds and so forth that we talked about, but it could also come from people calling, a claims office and say, I don't know how to do this. I don't
if they
understand.
call you, you need more humans to take those calls.
Exactly. And people don't want to call
And
if
that's
they
not
don't
a
have
profit
to.
center.
That's right. That's right. So as you can see, there's just, it really helps to avoid the friction. And it also just helps to improve the employee experience so that ultimately people get the benefits they need when they need it.
So if you help them eliminate the cost, not only can you reduce the cost along with them, like the call center example, I assume they will probably view you in a bidding scenario as a superior option because they now need less cost, whether in terms of experience or manual labor on their side to quote unquote get things done.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, if they feel that you can offer a comprehensive solution versus fragmentation of experience, and the saying is fragmentation destroys engagement, then they're going to, really, that would really help you in the marketplace.
A lack of engagement, I assume, probably destroys sales.
It destroys sales, and it also ultimately destroys value.
Right. Because so often I hear from the third party side, whether that is a Bannerman platform or large employer, they describe their experience as fragmented and having to employ or seasonally contract a number of humans for labor purposes to work with a specific carrier. So I assume if you help them do that, then you're more competitive in a bidding environment, your costs go down, engagement goes up. Only good things can happen with that.
Only good things can happen. That's right. And you can then spend more time on really trying to work on the value-added things like new benefits that can help individuals, or continue to work on ways in which you can relate the benefits that are being provided to the needs that people have.
And the reason I've been thinking about that, a scenario where if you fix an issue for your end partner or customer, only good things can happen. And yet there seems to be two schools of thought on how to make a decision around what experience to give to the end customer or partner. One school of thought is, if we do a good job there, only good things can happen. So let's focus on doing that well and work our way back on what we need to do. So that's school of thought one. School of thought two is, here is what we have always done for the past 20 years. Here is what our people process is. And here is what our technology likes to do. Let's focus on this and they get whatever they get. Describe to me like what you're seeing in the industry in terms of these two schools of thoughts. Are more people trending towards the first, which is more results oriented, and what kind of leadership styles and skill sets and team composition would result in either one? I see plenty of both in the industry.
Right. Yeah, I think, in the designing of products and the designing of services, oftentimes, you'll see situations in which, as you're describing, that capabilities are somewhat described from an internal focus on out, as opposed to from an external focus on in. And, my advice, and I think the best organizations are really focused on what is that end customer experience that you're trying to create, and gaining alignment between all of the different parts of your organization in order towards work to achieve that experience, or build that experience in steps, with everyone having that as the North Star that they're going to. I think the alternative is very expensive, very difficult, and then ultimately when you end up delivering that end product and service that you provide, you're often going to miss the mark.
So very much a customer-centric and reverse engineer approach, or this is what I have and that's what you're going to get approach?
Definitely the customer experience is the way to go. But, our industry, and I'm sure we can find many examples in which things were designed based on the current capabilities.
What I have and how it's always been done. So I think it's obvious for us, the two of us sitting here in a podcast, to say obviously being customer-oriented and reverse engineering back is better. And yet there are no shortage of examples of the opposite.
Absolutely. And
Why do you think that happens? Like what makes people do that, even though they probably inherently know it's good to prioritize the customer?
I think every organization, if you ask them how they design things, they would probably tell you they design it from the outside in, and
even if
probably
that's not
tell
what they
you,
actually did.
Yeah, I think what happens is I think this is how I have always felt that companies can differentiate themselves between how well they do that, and I think those that do that well, they have a better result in terms of their customer experience, the way in which their products are actually utilized.
Right. But that's the only thing that the outside world cares about.
That's right. But oftentimes it's complex. These are all very large organizations. There's oftentimes competing priorities, and it may sometimes lead you to this less than optimal approach.
I feel like what you're describing is very common to how the technology world often approaches the definition of success in tech. Because obviously for the tech world, the tech is the core product. There is no other core business. So for a good tech company that is properly oriented, the outside world is the world that defines if you have a good product. It's not an internal definition. Do you think the insurance industry could or / should adopt that mentality where we are not the sole ones with an internal definition of success. The market is the definition of success.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, I think, in my view, the best way to do well for your company is to do well for your customers. Because if your customers like
Which is
the
also good for your
experience-
shareholders.
That's right. So if your customers like their experience, then what are they going to do? They're going to stay with you. All right. What are they also going to do? If they're going to look at your other products and be inclined to go with you if you can. So, it's a great way to keep your customers and to grow, your business. And so I go back to it. I still continue to think that's the North Star. And I think that more and more, insurers are thinking that way, recognizing the fact that there is a complex ecosystem that they operate in which they have a lot of key stakeholders. So they have the end customer, but I'll go back. They also have to work well with the platforms that are providing the service. Very often, the actual end service to
Right.
the
So
customer.
they're kind of your customers
and
too.
the brokers as well. So it is a complex business because you have a lot of key stakeholders, and all of them are important.
Right. They're all customers, just in a varying sense.
That's correct.
And the last point I want to touch on is in this race on who can be more customer-centric and deliver the best and least fragmented experience. Carriers often engage in a buy versus build versus partner conversation. And this is often multifunctional. What are your thoughts around that, and what is a good balance approach to that buy, build, partner conversation? From a carrier perspective, not from
a carrier section,
tech company perspective.
Yeah, I would say there are probably certain parts, of, say, key processes. I'll give as one example, like underwriting, where that's something where you'd really want to build that yourself,
Right.
and you could work with key partners that can help you with different
That's a core
aspects of it,
competency.
but it's a core competency. But to the point where you have organizations that are building capabilities to scale that you don't view necessarily as the core competency, the core business of your organization, then I would try to maximize your use of those capabilities.
So, totally agree with you. Core competency is how a company differentiates itself, prices its product. You should absolutely own that in some way. On the reverse side, give me an example of areas where you don't necessarily need to own by building. You can own by investing or partnering with an outside company. And it doesn't have to be anything my company Infras does, just a function in general. That it doesn't make sense to go on a 5-year build path.
It would be, I would say that examples could be certainly in all of the areas of data exchange and connectivity. I think, as we talked about, that's a great area to leverage the capabilities and the technologies that are available outside. I would say also in certain, key functions where you might be able to leverage AI and certain technologies and domain expertise that is actually helped by working with multiple carriers, as well. And that could be in areas like organizing data, if, for example, in your claim systems where you're taking in all of this divergent information from doctors, from patients, and so forth, and being able to aggregate that. The ability to go out and test for fraud as another area where I would think that you would want to leverage some of the capabilities that are in the marketplace. And then other areas where you might be able to get capabilities, whether that's this whole area where we talked a little bit about, like, the well-being of individuals, because one of the other trends is in the area of being able to help people more with their well-being. So there are providers that are providing caregiving services, for example, or mental health counseling, or financial wellness capabilities like student loan reduction, debt reduction, and so forth. There's really opportunities to enhance the offering, but
Is that like a
also
buy,
leveraging.
build, or partner sort of opportunity?
I think it's more of a partner capability, and again, that only speaks to the importance of digitizing these connections so that when you're offering a diverse set of very important benefits, you can do it in a way in which people can actually use it and know, when they need it, they can get it.
Right, right. I guess when it comes down to building the core competency and then partnering for the rest, it depends on whether a company self-determines themselves to be a tech-enabled financial company or a tech company to begin with, right?
Right, right. And I just think, more and more, I think that we all have to think of ourselves as being able to provide a digital experience. It'll help us so much in terms of gaining access to the end consumer, but it also helps to reduce the cost and the friction that's involved. That's very often limits what we can do. And
Right.
by really taking on this transformation and being able to take advantage of these technological changes, we really have a great opportunity to not only provide these important benefits that people really need in times of need, but also can help them with their well-being, which helps them be more, have a better mental health, physical health, emotional health, and financial health.
Right.
And to me, that's a really terrific opportunity.
Right, right. And if you, for those types of things you describe, go the partner approach, then you have the opportunity to partner with multiple parties
That's
and
right.
capture large market share.
Right.
That reminds me of someone once telling me, from the tech world, even for someone with the scale and engineering capacity of Google, tens of thousands of top engineers in their prime, even Google doesn't literally build everything, right? Because if Google in theory could build anything it wants, it in theory could kill every startup that was ever, born, and yet it doesn't. And I think it's not whether they could, it's whether it makes sense for them to build everything. If something is a vertical issue, if something is niche, or if something is just flat out more economical to partner and buy, even the scale of Google. For example, YouTube was not built by Google.
Right.
It's one of their revenue leaders, but Google wants to focus on search. Siri, the voice assistant, was not built by Apple. I think Apple could have built it. And every startup would have to face the ultimate question of why won't Google copy you? And Google, in theory, could copy anything anybody does. Maybe that's what you described as sort of the insurance version of that. What's the core competency? Google could copy something in the insurance world, but that's not their core business, and therefore they don't.
That's right. That's right.
I know we touched a lot on the technology trends of the industry. And as a last note, you have worked in multiple P&Ls of a variety of lines of business. Do you feel like there are particular lines specifically that are more ripe for technology adoption and reaping these benefits than others? Let's say, I know you've mentioned how you look at dental and disability very different from, say, pet.
Right. Well, I think that certainly all the lines can benefit from the technology that we talked about, but when you look at some of the areas where there is a lot of interaction and there are complex claim situations, I think they can benefit greatly. So we talked about a bit of that in the disability space as an example, and certainly in the non-medical area, the disability, and then also in all of those coverages that employees have to enroll for and so forth, and that's just critical in terms of that enrollment experience, as well. I think that technology is changing in a way too, where taking advantage of virtual, sort of connectivity in the sense of, coming out of COVID, for example, there was a greater sensitivity on the importance, and there's a great change in the importance of mental health. And so the ability to gain access to counseling using sort of a telemedicine approach, I think, is important. There are certain situations where dental is actually used in terms of telemedicine.
That wasn't a thing even 10 years ago.
That's right. And caregiving and so forth in terms of getting information for caregivers and so on, and leveraging the digital world. So this is an area where it's very exciting, and it just keeps going. You think about financial. There's ways of getting counseling, debt counseling, or understanding a bit about how to set up your financial plan for important purchases in your life and important events like retirement or buying a house and so forth. So all of this is really contributing to this, the last of the three trends that we talked about, right? Of just well-being, and looking at it in a broader sense. And so I think if we didn't have these changes in technology that we just talked about, I think it would be very hard to offer these products, because you can offer these products, either the employer can perhaps offer it, or they can offer it in a semi-voluntary basis in which the employee contributes to the cost of those benefits, and that helps manage the cost for the employers.
Right. And it sounds like one of the rarer opportunities in a group space that is more greenfield and less crowded than the traditional lines, because I assume not every carrier is rushing into these greenfield lines, and therefore maybe more of a regional winner takes most kind of dynamic, as opposed to 100 winners split the market evenly.
Right. I mean, and ultimately there'll be differentiation because,
there'll be early adopters and there will be late or never adopters.
And then there'll be some adopters that adopt it because competitive pressures that state that they need to offer something, and so they do, versus those that really focus on it, really optimize that benefit that is given to that end user, and then integrate it into an experience where people can actually use it.
Well, the ones that adopt only because of competitive pressure are probably by definition already late.
Correct.
Well, Jim, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for being the first podcast guest from the group space. It was a pleasure to have you.
It's been great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nelson.